Strieber. I want to wish everybody the happiness of the season. We're having a wonderful Christmas, and I certainly hope you are too, that we are getting past our recession and that 2010, contrary to all expectations, is going to bring something wonderful into each one of our lives. This week, we begin on Dreamland with Linda Moulton Howe with an absolutely astonishing report about the Roswell incident and what happened at Wright Field after that incident. And I'm especially concerned about doing this because James Carrion, the president of MUFON, is going around debunking the Roswell incident and saying it didn't happen. We have to understand MUFON is in some way connected to the United States government. Do not trust this. Do not trust this at all. Stay with the truth. My own uncle was involved in that incident. I do not believe that it didn't happen, and I never will. I'll go to my grave certain that it happened, and frankly quite disgusted with what has gone wrong. Linda and I discussed that a little bit after her report. And then later in the show, Marla Fries is going to do an interview I frankly will never forget, and I don't think you will either. She is going to be talking to Monica Holy, who is a person who is involved in rescuing the dead. That's right, rescuing the dead. Do the dead need rescue? Well, in some cases, they certainly do. It's the first time I've ever heard anything like this, and it's most interesting as one expert psychic medium talks to another about something totally new, as far as I know, in the field of psychic research and psychic discovery. So it's a great show, and we'll be right back with Linda Moulton Howe. One reporter who loves mysteries is radio's leading science journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and the reporter and editor for EarthFiles.com, the Internet's most respected edge science website. Today, she has a report for us about what was going on behind the scenes at Wright Field between 1942 and 1952 from June Crane, an individual who was actually at Wright Field and participated directly in many of the events that are going to be described. This is an extraordinary report.
Thank you, Whitley. This is a story about 1942 to 52, actually before the 1947 crashes in New Mexico, but certainly goes to the heart of what our government might have retrieved from New Mexico. I heard about this in early November 2009 in Las Vegas at Ryan Wood's UFO Crash Conference, where a former police detective shared a tape-recorded interview he did on June 27, 1997, with a then 72-year-old woman who had worked as a secretary for the War Department at Wright Field, Ohio from 1942 until 1952. Before marriages, her name then was June Crane, and during her work at Wright Field, she held a secret and a top secret Q clearance that would have come through the Atomic Energy Commission. She heard about UFO crashes in New Mexico and retrievals of non-human bodies, and she even held in her own hands a piece of what was called a spaceship metal that she could not cut, and no matter how hard she twisted, the metal would always spring back to its original shape. The police detective who interviewed June Crane before her death is James E. Clarkson, 58 years old, who retired from the Aberdeen, Washington Police Department in 2000 because of a knee injury. Now Jim Clarkson investigates for a Washington state agency in the field of administrative law and is chief investigator for Washington State MUFON. Jim became interested in the UFO phenomena after reading John Fuller's book, Incident at Exeter, concerning 1965 UFO encounters in New Hampshire. Then, after he heard about the November 1986 Japanese airline pilot's report of a huge unidentified flying object over Alaska and radar confirmation by Anchorage Air Traffic Control, Jim Clarkson began to read and study more about the mystery. That led to his preparing programs about the UFO phenomena for public libraries, including one in 1993 when he first met June Crane, then June Cava, after a second marriage.
I gave a program in the Ocean Shores Library in 1993, and there were probably 40-some-odd people there. And when I was all done, this very determined older woman approached me and just looked me right in the eye and said, "You're right. The government knows all about UFOs, and they're not telling the truth. They're keeping it all secret." And I said, "Well, how do you know this?" And she said, "I can't tell you." And I said, "Well, how do you know?" And she said, "Because I worked there." And I said, "Well, why can't you tell me?" And she said, "Because they'll come and arrest me." And at the time, I think part of her reservation in talking to me was that I was the detective sergeant for the Aberdeen Police Department at the time. That's a town about 25 miles away from Ocean Shores. And I think June was a little bit worried that maybe I would arrest her.
And how did you get past that psychological obstacle?
Well, I didn't for 4 years. I gave her a business card, and I thanked her, and I told her I would be really interested in talking to her in the future. And it wasn't until 1997 that I got a surprise phone call from her. And that occurred because of the 50th anniversary of Roswell, and at the same time that the public was becoming really interested in Roswell, and it was all over the news, that's when we got a heavy dose of, well, it was really all weather balloons and dummies. That was all over CNN. And one day out of the blue, my telephone rang, and I answered it, and there was June on the other end of the phone, and basically without even really saying hello, she said, "It's a damn lie." And she said, "Have you been watching CNN?" And I said that I had. And she said, "That's the same lie that they used before." She said they lied about balloons a long time ago, and they're still lying. Then she said something to me that I've never forgotten. She said, "I'm 72 years old. I've outlived 2 husbands, and I've survived cancer twice. What are they going to do? Shoot me or put me in prison? I can do either one. And I'm not that slow," so I said, "Well, how soon can I be at your house?" So I ended up packing up a yellow pad and eventually a tape recorder, not right at first, but I started going to visit her at her home in Ocean Shores, and basically we sat up late at night and had coffee, and she told me her life story, and one time I asked her if I could tape record her, and that, of course, led to a very lengthy interview. The primary interview that I did with June Crane was at her home in Ocean Shores, Washington, and it was on June 27th, 1997, and it occurred at about 10:30 in the evening.
She would have been what age?
72.
And she lived until what year and age?
Well, she died in August of 1998, so she made it just past 73. I'm not sure how much June really knew about the state of her cancer, but she had a document drawn up where she said that she was giving me the rights to her life story. And she never told me that she was going to do that. She just dropped it on me.
Right.
And so I believe that she knew. And that, of course, adds credibility because it's considered universal in any court of law that if a person thinks that they're going to pass away, I mean, obviously if they're going to die immediately, it's called a dying declaration. But just the idea that someone knows that they're wrapping up their life, that adds a lot of credibility.
And what would be the most important information directly related to Roswell, Wright-Patterson, bodies, UFOs that you heard that night?
Well, she told me that by the time she left Wright-Patterson for the last time in 1952, she said that they were investigating at least 3 crashes of alien vehicles and that there was possibly a 4th. And she did not give me exact locations other than to say that Roswell was one of those. And then there was also an incident where she stated that she had coffee with a man who said that he had just flown from New Mexico and brought in bodies.
Now that is one of the audio excerpts that we have, and I'm going to play it right here.
The sergeant, his first name's Clarence, Master Sergeant, came in from New Mexico. He said, what I brought in this morning, he said that he brought two little men in. Well, he called them little green men, then he described them as a greenish blue. And they were 4 foot tall, and they were dead.
We're talking about non-humans.
Non-humans, right.
Was this Master Sergeant breaking security by talking about this?
No, because we were all secure. See, when you have security like that, you can't even take your husband to a party. If we had our Christmas party, we went and there was guard at the door. And nobody but people in the branch or the other ones, you can bring your husband and your wife. And when you're at home, you can't talk about your job because you got that in your head. You got security and you're clear and you keep your damn mouth shut. That's all there is to it.
Can you elaborate beyond what is on this audio excerpt?
Yes, because we also discussed this when we did not have the recording on. And she clarified that Master Sergeant Clarence, he started describing what happened, and initially everyone at the table was horrified, thinking that there had been a crash of a military aircraft, and everyone was sad and upset, thinking that perhaps somebody they knew had died in this crash. And then he clarified that no, the people who were killed were not human, and that this wasn't a crash of an airplane.
And that's where she heard him describe the little green men who were greenish blue?
Yes. There was something that happened later on that day that kind of adds weight to this entire conversation. That was the fact that June recalled that there was what she referred to as a too hot memo that came out later that day. And this meant that there was a courier from the commanding officer who went to every single person who worked there, and you were required to stop what you were doing, read the memorandum, and sign off on it stating that you understood it and that you would comply. And it was telling everyone that some irresponsible person has been discussing little green men and crash saucers, and that you will cease and desist immediately upon penalty of being discharged and possibly being prosecuted. And the two things that bothered June about this, one was if there was no truth to what this Master Sergeant had told everyone, then why would they even bother with this elaborate procedure? And secondly, she wanted to know how the commanding officer knew about this so quickly, because she said it wasn't that long after she had the conversation with this Master Sergeant.
It suggests that the coffee room where they were talking was probably bugged, and it also implies that even within Wright Field and people with Q clearances, they would threaten anybody, since they all had clearances together, they would threaten anybody who even talked to each other about non-humans.
Exactly. So in other words, they did not view this as simple office gossip.
And the very fact that they would try to strong-arm their own insiders who had similar Q clearances, including the Master Sergeant and June and the others, and do it in such a way that they were saying there was no truth to this when they all knew that it was, shows that there was kind of this 1984 newspeak going on within Wright Field among the very people who had to have access to this information to do their work.
Absolutely. It reflects a consistent policy of denial, of suppressing discussion or inquiry, and that is also furthered by the other major revelation. She talked about the scientists and engineers who came back from New Mexico where they had experimented with the V-2 rocket and later with the Aerobee rocket. They saw UFOs routinely while they were doing their work.
This was a cover-up. It was right at the very start of it. Project Blue Book was not formed to investigate those things. It was formed to stop the people from thinking that's what it was. That's what Project Blue Book was all about. It was to try to squelch all talk of UFOs.
You mentioned that people in this group went to White Sands to do testing and then came back.
Yes.
And did they say that anything unusual had happened to them?
Well, they said they were just as thick as fleas up there. They'd sit at night, they'd sit on the outside of their motels where they would stand in the building, and they would just watch them go over all types and shapes. There'd be motherships, big ones with little ones coming out of it, and then they'd see them return, and it had different colored lights. Some had orange, sometimes red and yellow, different lights they would see. And then if the people, the engineers and scientists would report that they saw them, they locked them up in a motel for 24 hours with no access to no radios, no people, no nothing. And they had them to write up what they saw. And then when they come out the following day, 24 hours later, they'd have them write it up again. And like the engineer said, to hell with it. I'm not going to report it anymore. I'm not going to be locked up for 24 hours.
This accomplished two purposes. One of them was obviously they got at least two different accountings of whatever it was that was observed, and then they basically discouraged these scientists and engineers from discussing it further or reporting anything else in the future.
She talked with you about a subject that many of us have heard bits and fragments about, and that is metal that was found in the Roswell debris field.
Well, this is perhaps the most fascinating story, because here we're going from being an indirect witness to being a direct witness, because she said that she actually got to handle the metal. Someone actually showed you a piece of something.
Yeah.
Was this during the same period of time?
51, 52. He walked in and he threw it on my desk. It was a piece that's about this big. And it was
about half of the size of a business card?
Yeah, about that size. And it was bent like this. And he says, June, you're a good wrecker. Tear that thing apart. And I took it and I bent it and I twisted it, laid it back down, and it got right back the same shape. He says, try cutting it. I got on my desk, I got my scissors out, and I snipped at it, and you know, there was no way I could even cut that piece of metal. And it was as light as a feather. I had it in my hand. I would say that it didn't weigh as much as these two cards. It wasn't that heavy. It was so light, but strong, and it was about, the thickness would be about that thick. And so strong, it was sort of a grayish gunmetal type of color. And you could see that on the inside there was that there was coating on the outside. Both sides of it was the same. And the inside seemed to have a sort of a light lead-colored center.
What were the edges of this like? Were they even, or was it like part of something else?
It was even, not even. And I said, what is it? He said, piece of spaceship. I said, I just come back from New Mexico and I promised him. He had no business having in the first place.
So he was breaking security.
He was. Definitely. I always look at things, metal things, and I still have that curiosity because it still bothers me. And I have yet to see anything that had those properties and look like that. And so light.
And in context, the situation was, I believe, that she was a young woman working in an office, and as has happened before in the history of the world, I think that a male was trying to impress a female, and he said too much and did too much, which is that he walked up to June kind of flirting and flippant and pulled a piece of this metal out of his pocket and then asked her to tear it up, asked her to try and destroy it or have some effect on it. And no matter what she did, she couldn't dent it, she couldn't tear it, she couldn't cut it or anything else. And yet, as she described very well, that when you folded it up, it would return to its original shape, and it didn't look like anything had happened to it. And when she asked the officer, what is it? His response was, it's a piece of a spaceship. Now, she told me later on, this was not on the recording, that what happened was that somebody else walked in the room, and as soon as somebody else walked in the room, he jammed the metal into his pocket, and that was the last time she ever saw it.
This metal, I understood that it was about the size of a standard business card, but I did not understand how thick it was.
It's not very thick. I think like maybe a couple, 3, 4 business cards stuck together. I remember her holding her fingers like that. But every time she would say anything like that, she emphasized, but it was as light as a feather. It weighed nothing.
Right, and so maybe the size of a business card and 1/8 of an inch thick.
That might be right.
Nothing about analysis?
No, because she didn't ever see that. She probably wasn't supposed to see this at all, and he probably wasn't supposed to have it. And if he was supposed to have it, he wasn't supposed to be using it to impress the office staff. Her paperwork, her documents showed that she was steadily promoted. And I believe that she was used as kind of a general purpose office manager / tech secretary clerk. She told me about logging top secret material in and out of safes. That was part of her duties routinely. She also told me along the way she was required to type up standard response letters to people who reported UFOs. Now, she didn't say directly that she worked for Project Blue Book. My understanding was that she was tasked to write some of these letters, and that the context was that these were just dismissive letters, that the particular type of air vehicle that you have described is not possible given standard aerodynamic principles, etc. It was sort of just to get rid of the person type letter, and that she had helped write those letters.
And that reinforced her perspective of Project Blue Book as being really a misinformation project as far as the public was concerned, while behind the scenes, real scientists, real engineers, and real military people were doing serious investigations that never reached the public.
Exactly. That's the number one bottom line for what I learned from June Crane, that what the public is told and what these scientists and engineers discussed behind closed and very secure doors were two entirely different things.
And that she even had to take the typewriter ribbon out of her typewriter and put it in a safe every night?
Absolutely. In fact, she told me one time she got in trouble because she left one piece of paper in a drawer in her desk. She told me that they took security. They were extremely serious about it. And in fact, she described on one occasion that there was another person she worked with that she was suspicious of, and she described in detail how that person eventually got picked up by the FBI, and she never saw that woman again, and they actually took her desk away.
What is your perspective on why the overwhelming policy of denial in the interest of national security in its requirement for everyone involved to lie?
I think it starts back with one word, fear. And I think they were afraid of what they had found and what the implications might be, because bearing in mind that their fundamental job is to maintain the security of the skies over the United States and the interests of the United States anywhere in the world, and suddenly now we are confronted with something that is completely out of our control, and presumably if they have the kind of technology to come here wherever they come from, any sort of weaponry that they might possess would almost certainly be overwhelming. So they're afraid of what they found. They're also afraid of how the public might react, given our religious, social, and political institutions that are dependent upon everybody thinking that everything is predictable and okay. There's fear throughout this whole subject, and I believe that that's what dictated their response. They keep dealing with it from a mentality of fear. I can't imagine that they're hostile. I mean, if they were going to be hostile, I don't know why we wouldn't already know it. The only thing I could presume is that someone knows something that's so terrible that they are just scared to death that it will ever get out.
And Whitley, another very interesting piece that June Crane told James was that one day at Wright Field, this would have been probably around the 1949, 50, 51 period, that she was asked to go and take dictation from a man who, quote, had the coldest eyes I have ever seen, close quote. And his name was Dr. Wernher von Braun. And for 3 hours she took dictation because she was the fastest secretary with dictation. And the entire subject was a background trying to get $600,000 in what was called seed allotment money for a new American space program. And she told James that if she had not married and she had stayed at Wright Field, she was pretty confident that she would have gone on to work for what became NASA and the work of Wernher von Braun.
What a story, Linda. You know, Linda, as you were telling this, and as I was listening to the report, I was thinking of the fact that my uncle was at Wright Field and worked also on that debris, and it's a real shame that both of them are dead. I would love to have known if they knew each other.
Yes.
If my uncle might not have been the man who showed her that debris, because he was certainly against the secrecy all of his life, although he kept it religiously. He did keep it.
And Whitley, isn't it fascinating that now at the end of 2009, 60-some years later, that we are for the first time hearing about breakthroughs in laboratories of what is called memory metal that will return to its original shape?
Well, I was told that this was metal that was affected, that had been welded at the molecular level, and that it wasn't even until we developed the electron microscope that we began to be able to see how it was actually made. And that it was still, even when I was told this 20 years ago, far beyond what we could do, but maybe not so far now.
Well, any of our Dreamland listeners who have anyone say to them, trying to dismiss Roswell and other crash sites in the United States and around the world as being either phony, made up, or some sort of advanced American test back in the 1940s, you just say, there was a woman who worked for 10 years at Wright Field. Her name was June Crane. And we have her voice, and we have all of her employment records. We have a copy of her secret clearance. And this woman was telling the truth.
Well, exactly. And you know, Linda, there's another factor in terms of the secrecy. Initially, I'm sure, quite a number of the high-ranking Air Force officers were very, very conservative Christians. And they would have therefore believed that these were demons from hell, not people from another planet. And I think that we started shooting at them. And I believe that that's where the problems began, that we've developed a very dysfunctional relationship, and the government probably doesn't know how to fix it. Unfortunately, if it was a public relationship, the people would probably fix it in 2 days. But still, we go on like this instead.
And if it had been made public in the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration, when, as far as I know, George Marshall was talking with FDR about interplanetary and celestial craft that they were retrieving even back in that period, the early 40s, that if everybody had gone to the world and said, what you're seeing in the skies appears to be from someplace else in the cosmos, please don't panic. We are all working on this. There does not seem to be any concerted effort to hurt humans. Please report to us, help us, because all of us on Earth need to understand this phenomenon. I think history and wars would have been completely different if they had been honest then.
We would have a much better and more glorious history instead of being where we are, standing at the edge of the abyss. Linda Moulton Howe, thank you very much, and it's so good to have you back on Dreamland. I hope to have you back much more often in 2010. Next up on Dreamland, most interesting interview. Marla Freese will be interviewing a psychic who is doing rescues among the dead. You will never have heard anything like this before. We'll be right back.
This is Marla Fries, and my guest today works the night shift, so she says. She punches in at around probably 11 p.m. and works all night until about 6, rescuing the dead. No, she's not a paramedic, but a psychic medium healer who has found her calling, assisting the troubled deceased through her lucid dreams. This is a fascinating dreamland, listeners, and it is my pleasure to introduce the author of Fringe Dweller, On the Night Shift, Monica Holy. Welcome.
Hi, Marla. How are you today?
Well, I got to tell you, I love your book.
Oh, thank
love
you.
It. And I think that you are a wonderful writer, and you have put the idea of psychic medium, healer, what you do here through this book and your stories is quite extraordinary. So let's tell our listeners exactly how you do work.
Well, it is different from when I was a child, but currently I have a night job. You drive, most people drive to work. I go to sleep at night, so in a sense, I can sleep on the job. It's fantastic. Right. So I lay myself down to sleep, and I use my dreams as a portal to another dimension, and I lucid dream, which for people who may not know what that is, I am aware that I'm dreaming, and I can do something about it. I'm active in my dreams. When I'm flying, I know I'm flying.
And you meet up with people who have recently crossed over or who are in another space and time. Tell us.
There are a variety of different experiences, but essentially it's as if I was a giant radio tuner, and my dial seems to be my calling to be set to the frequency of lost or distressed souls. So they actually find me, and it's as if I was channel surfing, watching television, but instead it's in my dreams, and I'm dropped suddenly into a movie that's already in progress.
That is just fascinating. I mean, it's just some of these stories are so staggering. So why don't you give us an example from the book about one of the things that happened that will kind of give our listeners an idea about how you work?
Wow. Okay, I can introduce it.
I'm putting all the work on you there. Mark.
Yeah, I can introduce a number of elements there. Okay. As an example, what I call a push thought.
Yes.
A woman will perhaps, this actually happened to me. It was dark. Now, people remember I'm in a dream, okay? Mm-hmm. It's a dark night parking lot, and a woman's in the parking lot trying to get to her car. I am in my ethereal dream body, astral body, whatever, it's interchangeable, what you want to call it, and I'm hovering behind her, and I know she can't see me, but I see the fellow who's trying to attack her. He's just around the corner, and it's clear what his intent is. Mm-hmm. And that's not going to do with me, of course. My intent is to warn this woman, and so I start shouting in her ear, turn around. Mm-hmm. Doesn't seem to be working. She somehow, for some reason, doesn't hear me, and my intent increases. And I just well up inside with my emotional intent until I literally am just screaming in her ear to turn around. I call this a push thought because I'm really trying to push that thought into her head. It worked. She turned around. She saw the fellow. She ran to her car, and she made it. And that was incredible. So
you interceded in that example.
Exactly. And now in that particular case, she couldn't see me. But I've had other experiences, and one of the first ones that really validated it for me was a car accident. A tragic car accident had happened, and I'm hovering at the scene. The firefighters can't see me. The police officers can't see me. But the fellow who has not yet passed over, he has not died yet, he makes eye contact with me. Now, I'm in my dream body, and I'm looking down at myself going, okay, I know I'm ethereal here, but he seems to be seeing me. And so I do the dodge and weave just to try and experiment and know this fellow's actually following where I'm going. I immediately go over to him, and I cradle him, and I do not leave his side because my mission there is just to be with him. And so he crosses over from life to death, but after he crosses over from life to death, I'm still there. Now he's in his ethereal body. And he was able to move on into the light with very little assistance because he was already vibrating at that frequency to be able to do so. But it's the before, the during, and the after. And some of the cases are extreme. I mean, I have something else that I refer to as a jump-in. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to clarify that this is absolutely permission-based. If somebody does not want help, it's very clear, and I'm not allowed to do this maneuver. When I'm in my dream body and I'm trying to help somebody out that's in a tragedy, it's very much like astral triage, because it's like a doctor in a medical emergency room. You don't ask the how, what, or the why. You just do whatever you can to help. Mm-hmm. And sometimes not everything works. And I've had the odd occasion where I actually am so intent on helping, I merge. I take my dream body and I put it inside theirs. So I'm now merging with their body. Sorry?
Will you merge with them when they're crossing or when they're going through a traumatic experience?
When they're going through a traumatic experience before death, mm-hmm. I've actually merged with their body so I can hear, see, feel all of their thoughts. It's like another part of me. It's just I'm merged and I can sense everything that they're going through, which for me is very emotionally draining.
Oh, of course it is. Now, are you talking to them as them? Are you imparting your wisdom and trying to help that person as that person?
I'm helping them as if I'm assuming here that they would hear another voice, so to speak. You know how sometimes, we turn around for no reason, or we get a thought in our head,
yes,
and we act upon it? I'm thinking it's like that because, of course, I can only speak from my perspective. But let's say somebody is drugged, mm-hmm. or they've knocked their head, and they're not quite lucid enough to get out of a situation. Mm-hmm. I will be with them, inside them, encouraging them that they've got what it takes. Stay awake, go for the door, hang on to here, whatever the situation is. And I found that it has made a difference because some of these occurrences I actually have seen in the news the next day where it's made a difference, and that was a validation.
This is staggering because, honestly, I don't think I've ever met anybody like you. You know, I've been around for a while, and I've heard, and I've been involved in various, stages through my development in the work that I do, assisting possibly a soul that will come in during a reading saying, I'm lost, I don't know where my parents are, and I've worked with other mediums, and we sort of help them. But this is like full-on, you have a job here.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I actually was questioning myself because through the stages of my life, my experiences have changed too and developed. And at one point I said, what is the point of seeing and experiencing all these tragedies? Mm-hmm. And the message that came back via Spirit Guide was, your job is to transport people to death.
Wow.
And that was, whoa. Yeah, I mean, that's not something you put on your resume.
No, it's not. And, it certainly would raise some eyebrows. But you do sound lucid right now speaking to me, so I'm really grateful for that. But, it also puts into, our minds the idea of a living person assisting the dead, assisting in an etheric way or an astral way. And it just gives us a whole nother idea of angels.
It does. I mean, it's pretty heavy. I mean, for myself as well, when it really brought it home for me was when I had a particular experience where there was a girl, and she was a runaway, and she was just in the process of calling at the phone booth to call home that she wanted to come home, and she was ready. And unfortunately, I merged with her body and experienced her tragic death with her. I won't go into any details. And what happened was, immediately after she died, the merge was gone. I was back out, so to speak, and she was in her ethereal body, and I was in mine. And her last wish is that the only thing on her mind was how badly she wanted to get back home. Mm-hmm. So I grabbed her hand, and ethereally we just sought on that slipstream, and we went until we literally zipped through and found her house and dropped in. And as soon as we dropped into that house, she was free to go. And that was all she had wanted, was to be at home for her parents. Now, from my perspective, I knew that she had arrived home safely. The unfortunate business is I'm the only one that knows that. Her parents, gosh knows what they have to deal with, because there are people all over the world who don't know what happened to their loved ones, and they think that perhaps they died alone. Maybe it was on a mountain or in a desert. And from my experience, what I'd love people to know from my perspective is that I have not seen that. Nobody dies alone. There is always somebody there. And I'm not the only fringe dweller. I am not the only one, because in extreme cases of large tragedies, I have seen others out there doing the same thing.
And maybe some of them don't even know they're doing it.
Exactly. And I was thinking about this walking down the street one day, and I thought, if we thought of ourselves as this broader sense of the human community, we walk down the street, and how often, I think we all do it on some level, we do these little prejudges when we walk down the street. Oh, this person, is homeless, or this person is such and such, and appearances. And then I thought, how do we know who our, as you say, guardian angels are?
Exactly.
And that really brought things into perspective for me. And, I walk around perpetually in a state of bliss and gratitude, which I know annoys a lot of people, but I've just seen and felt so many aspects of mass consciousness and human community that I just can't help otherwise.
Well, you're experiencing something on a night-to-night basis that is enriching your understanding of the other side, which, most people are in fear of death anyway, and you're shedding light on a whole new subject here. So let's take a break, and we're going to come back and talk more with Monica Holy. Welcome back to Dreamland. This is Marla Fries, and we're talking with Monica Holy, who goes to sleep at night and helps the dead. So, Monica, let's kind of give our listeners an idea of how this process actually does start. I don't want to make fun of the idea that you punch in at 11, but basically, does this happen every night, and what actually precipitated this for you? What started this?
Well, I don't know exactly what started it. I have always just known it. When I was young, my first memories of dream experiences were before I had spoken language, like where I could have words to speak and communicate with people. And it actually was what I deem a past life memory, where I find myself in the body of a young lad who dies tragically in the Korean War. I've pieced this together now by, the memories and the uniforms and things like that. But it started out as a child. So for me, it's a fifth limb. And it's always been a challenge to try and talk to people and describe it. Now, my experiences have changed. When I was a child, I was more clairsentient, clairaudient, clairvoyant. I had some things going on. It's gradually expanded and broadened into this where it's primarily in my dream state. Initially, I'll tell you, I went through a stage where I wasn't sleeping at night. I would literally lay down to go to sleep. And I don't know how many people can identify with this, where you're just starting to drift off to sleep. You can hear the dog outside, the fellow down the street mowing the lawn, and then images start flickering in. And I found that with talking with people that's usually where there's a division between people who continue on into a state of lucid dreaming, and other people tend to those images, putting words to them, or trying to dictate the movement of them, and that's where I find they lose the thread.
Oh.
And they find that it's frustrating, because I've found from literally trial by fire, that has been my whole life. Marla, I've been looking for the manual and asking for that manual from the time I was a kid.
I know, we're all looking for the manual, and you've just added another chapter to this whole manual, because honestly, I wanted to mention that in working as a medium, it's often that the dead have shown me how they die.
Okay.
And they let me know in a very neutral sort of way what actually was experienced, but the people that are sitting in front of me who are their relatives know the information and I don't. And
right.
as I am dictating to them what their loved one is saying, they're sitting there, they may be crying, they may be really upset, and a lot of these are homicide cases that they have not informed me that their loved ones were murdered. But it's consistent that when they do say, look, I was removed out of my body before I could actually feel anything really horrific. And, of course, I remember my head being hurt or my arm being hurt, and I remember these things. But they always give me the idea that they were rescued somehow. They don't show me who necessarily comes to be with them. Sometimes they do, like another relative. But they do tell me that, look, I was pulled out of my body before that impact happened.
Wow. Marla, that is fascinating. Oh, my gosh, because from my perspective, I've actually never heard that. And for me, I just got tingles on my arm. It's like, wow, that is gratifying to hear because that further validates that I'm not the only one doing this. And it continues that idea that I'd like people to know that no one dies alone. That's fantastic.
Well, I sort of do a blanket statement regarding this because the information that, let's just say, I had a situation with a woman whose children were sitting in front of me, and she was explaining how she died.
Right.
I thought she had cancer because I was burping, because that's usually my sign for cancer, and I was saying, oh, I hit my head, and yes, my arm was hurt, and oh, there's a bruise right here on my cheek, and, I fell to the ground, and she wasn't giving details like I was being beaten up. She was just giving the details of what had happened to her. And she said, but Spirit came and grabbed me by my shoulders and yanked me out of my body.
Wow.
And the first thing I thought of, just like what you had said with this young girl wanting to see her family, was she said, I couldn't stop thinking about my girls. I couldn't stop thinking about my girls. And yes, they have been taken back to their loved ones, and they've also shown me, like, what they were doing when they came through the house. Like, I saw you eating ice cream, watching Jerry Springer. Little details like that the family members go, oh, my God, I wondered about that, or I felt that. So, and then, of course, you find out from the loved ones sitting there that this woman, who I thought had cancer, did have cancer, but she was murdered.
Okay.
So this is, we're putting the pieces together, Monica, and your book is just stunning. I have to read something from your book. You say it was during your work with a woman named Carolyn that you decided that you were going to sign up for the night shift.
Yeah.
You said this job, it was like a posting for the job that would have read like this: wanted, emotional intuitive, empath, and lucid dreamer to work the borderlands. Must be committed to healing and guidance and able to deal with the traumatized dead. And I love that because the qualifications that you write down here are apprenticeship from birth and before, at least 30 years of experience in spirit communications, dark night of the soul past, certification in grounding, electromagnetics, energy manipulation, benevolent intent, experience in jump-in, push thought, and border patrol preferred, apply within. That is just, I'm mesmerizing. I mean, can you imagine having that in Craigslist or something?
Oh, God. I actually put that on a T-shirt, and it's funny because, when people first, oh, you're a psychic or you're a medium, and they don't know what that is, or sometimes people are a little, because they don't know, they're a little fearful, but they read the T-shirt, and it just breaks the ice. It really does.
Great. You can send me one. I'm looking forward to it. So you started to explain what you talk about with the push thought. So tell me a little bit about the jump-in. What is that?
Well, I described before the idea of a merge, like with that one girl.
So it is actually the merge. So you jump into the body. Great. And so let's talk about the Border Patrol. What exactly are you doing with that? I mean, we need Border Patrols in California.
Well, I mean, some of the experiences that I've had include just a wide diversity, and some of them start delving into dimensional and quantum mechanics, which I can't even put words to or technical words to. And then So as far as different dimensions.
Is that referring to like the grid that you talk about?
Oh, that was an amazing experience, and I'll tell you, that really makes you feel very, very minute in the large scheme of things. I found myself in a black void there, and I've got the painting, the grid, which is on the website in color because.
And excuse me, as you mentioned your paintings, your artwork in this book is staggering. However, I wish to God it would have been in color.
Thank you.
And are you going to be making prints of your artwork? Because I'm signing up. There are two pieces. I'm serious. There are two pieces that are so mesmerizing to me. And actually, we're going to have to talk about this in detail, Love's Light, because I actually drew something very similar to that when I had a past life regression with Brian Weiss.
Now, do you see it as a cone or do you see it as a tunnel?
It wasn't a cone. It was actually a portal above me.
Okay.
It looked like a window.
Okay.
So what the geometric pattern that you have drawn here is something that I drew back in '96 after my experience with Brian Weiss. But your artwork is just so amazing, and you must make prints of these.
I'm working on it.
You're very much like Andy Lakey, Monica.
Sorry?
You're very much like Andy Lakey. Andy Lakey is this wonderful artist who had been visited by these angels, and he made a decision to make a certain amount of angels in artwork, and that's what he did. And he has a fabulous book about it. And your depictions of these light beings and what you're seeing in these dreams is very much like that. Your own style, of course, but these. Oh my God, I'm so blown away by them.
Well, it's interesting that you just mentioned that, Marla. That just sparked something in my mind, which was one of the messages that came from my spirit guide was that they came to me and they said, you are a fringe dweller, a buffer between two worlds, and you're to use your art as an introduction to the other side.
Hello. I'm looking at Love's Light, all these beings. Is it 5 by 7 or 2 by 7? It's this longer piece that you drew that's blue.
That one's called Thank You. It's large. It's like 7 to 9 feet wide.
Amazing. And I looked at your website. Your website is fascinating.
Thank you.
The colors, the resonance about it. And, there is this interesting element of darkness that you do touch here because of the void or the blackness that you go into. But I want you to explain to our viewers, or our listeners, what the resonance is like when you're in there so that they have a sensorial experience of it.
When I'm in a darker?
Yes. Well, in the actual, like the grid, where you stepped into that dark void.
Oh, that was interesting because, my logical mind comes along as the backseat driver, and it's that balance of the art of allowing for the experience and trying to quiet the monkey thoughts and the chatter of the logical mind. And so I'm suspended in this void of blackness. And to try and describe that, there's no need for gravity because there's no sense of falling, but there's no top, there's no bottom, there's no sides, and it's completely black, and it's just a matter of being. It just is. If somebody can think of no gravity, it's really hard to imagine that. And then these strings of light, just like silly string, everywhere around me. Mm-hmm. But I had this sense, I had this knowing that don't touch a single strand because I just knew that these strands were interconnecting places, portholes, black holes, wormholes, everywhere.
Was it like a matrix?
Yes, it was like a matrix of all that is. And I felt that if I touched one string, each one of those glinting lights where strings cross each other were like a junction. And I knew that I'd be gone. I'd be who knows
someplace
where.
Else.
Exactly. And my fear, and this is probably where the logical mind came in, my fear was if I go there, do I have the knowledge of getting back?
Oh.
So I didn't touch the strings. Of course, all my friends were like, you should have touched them. You should have touched them.
Well, that's fascinating that you knew, or you were given information. Here's where your boundaries are.
Yes.
Here's where we want you to navigate.
Yes.
This is the structure where we are protecting you, giving you access to this information. And, there are some boundaries you've got to hang on to.
Well, it's interesting that you say boundaries and protection, because just as we have a way of life or a lifestyle in the waking reality, as I call it, I've found that it continues on the other side. I go to school. I sit in class. Of course, I'm learning some pretty wild stuff. Mm-hmm. I play ethereal paintball. I go to flight school, astral flight school. But what's really interesting, Marla, that I found is the concept is that you will not get too big for your britches. There's no way, because just when you start expanding, with the ego side of yourself, which tends to come through, you will get knocked on your butt really quickly. Oh, you think you know a lot? Here, try and handle this one.
Well, I like that idea. So let's take a little bit of a break and come back and talk more about getting knocked on your butt. We're back with Monica Holy, and I want to talk a little bit about the idea that if you are too big for your britches and you do get knocked on your butt, what actually happens? You have a chapter here called The Healing.
Oh, yes.
And I want to talk about you being dropped into something that was in progress, that was happening, and I'd like for you to share a little bit about this with our listeners.
Okay. Now, what part were you referring to, the experience itself?
Yes, the experience itself, and what happens with the idea of healing in this process when you are in the night shift. Tell us a little bit about the knowing and the healing that it takes place, because it's innate to your being, and it comes natural to you.
Yes.
So what happens in this exchange?
That particular experience was another sense of, it was an eye-opener, and it was a validation of another sort. Up until then, I had primarily been on my own when I was dropped into these movies in progress, so to speak. And in this particular case, I'm dropped into a scene, and I find myself at the foot of a bed where this gentleman is in this bed, and he is not well. I have this knowing that he is not well. It's almost as if I can see the insides, and I like the term dis-ease. I mean, on a grander scale, we're starting to learn through quantum mechanics and a lot of other things how our own emotional perpetuation of something can actually create dis-ease. And this fellow definitely needed a cleansing and assistance of some sort. Now, there's two things going on. I noticed I wasn't the only one around his bed. And I suddenly realized, oh, wow, I'm not the only one doing this, which can be very humbling, because until you have that experience, you think, why me, am I the only one? Mm-hmm. But when I saw these other beings, and I didn't see them in humanoid form, so to speak, I saw them, the light is just so hard to describe. It is so intense, and the light just seemed to resonate from their heart center. And if you can imagine a light that is so bright that it's just blinding, but for some reason you're still able to see it. You can still look at it without needing any sunglasses or anything. And the love and the unconditional love that filled this room was incredible. And I realized, I'm one person doing this, or I'm one ethereal body doing this. But then you add another one, and it seems to compound the amount of light and the amount of energy. And then in total, then, with all those light beings around, the energy in that room, and I realized working together can do so much more. Now, we didn't join hands, but the intent to offer unconditional love and healing surrounded this fellow and literally went underneath his bed into his body in an attempt to push out the dis-ease that he had.
Well, are you familiar with the MAP, the Medical Assistance Program that is the Co-Creative White Brotherhood?
No.
I'm as soon as you started talking about this, I'm like, oh my God, this sounds so much like the book from, I think it's Machel Small Right, something like that. But it is, the White Brotherhood is the Brotherhood of Light, which is something that I've studied for years. But this is a medical assistance program where everything that you're actually saying right now is explained in this book.
I got to get that book.
Yes, the medical assistance program. And it's fascinating to think that you, once again, are a living being that is participating in these extraordinary experiences.
It's a little mind-blowing. I was working with a friend of mine who, she's in the book, she passed away. It's what precipitated a lot of the things. She was dealing with cancer at the time, and I never told her she knew that I had these experiences, but I never told her what my intent was at night when I wanted to help her, and she was in another town. And I would go to sleep at night just purely with the intent, asking all those of the light, anybody that could help, to help me, to show me what the next best thing to do to help my friend would be. Mm-hmm. And the next day she called me and she said, What were you in my room last night? And I said, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. Feigning innocence, because I don't like to influence. And she said that she had woken up from her sleep and had the impression that there was a number of light beings around her and that somebody was at her head, and just as she was starting to come to, the light being leaned down and said, "We're not done yet. Go back to sleep." Which I thought, wow.
Yeah. Wow is right. Well, in the book you also refer to the Greys. Now, this, just for our listeners, you are on the website of one of the most well-known UFO communities in the entire world. So your reference to the Greys in the book is not Greys per se of what the UFO or abductee or contactees are experiencing. You have another definition of this. Could you explain a little bit about that?
True. I realized afterwards I should have come up with another name. But what that is I was dropped into a movie in progress that was, for me, very overwhelming. And this is one of those examples of where I got knocked on my butt. Mm-hmm. I get dropped in, and it's dark. It's dark. It's this dark void, no up, no down. And all of a sudden, I can hear scuttling. Just scuttling, like, long nails on a countertop, mm-hmm. or a chalkboard, and it gets louder and louder and louder. And I can't see anything, but I can sense this omnipresence of just, and it envelops me and gets closer, and then I see them. And there are these gray figures of dark energy. And the best way for me to describe it is comparing it to the Harry Potter movie with the Death Eaters.
The Death Eaters, okay.
It's like energy vampires.
Ah.
These Greys are in a perpetual state of the lower frequency of vibration, and if I can recommend a book, Power versus Force, is just phenomenal to really help describe this idea of vibrational frequency.
Power versus Force by?
Hawkins.
Okay.
Yes, I think it's David Hawkins.
Possibly.
I have to check on that. But it is phenomenal because it really explained things for me. These gray entities, spirits, souls, were those that had crossed over but were not able to change their frequency to that enabled them to go into the light. And so they were in this perpetual state of fear, anger.
So did they need light themselves because they were gray instead of white? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The darkness. The darkness was emanating through them. What do you think it was?
When you have a group, like a peer pressure group of like-minded individuals, but they feed on each other and they grow and expand because...
Sounds like the government. Just kidding. Sorry, psychic humor there. Go on.
It's funny. It's contagious, and so they expand in their own mindset of fear and loathing and anger, and they had grown to a state that was just overwhelming for me. And my light alone was not enough, and I was overwhelmed. And I tried to implement the tools of protection that my mentor Carolyn had given me, but it wasn't fast enough, and it wasn't quite enough. And that flicker of doubt in my mind, of course, just reeled me right backwards, and I realized, okay, this is what I just have to get out of here, retreat.
So you were shown an arena where your light and your beingness really wasn't going to have much of an effect.
No, not unless one of those, because they all stood together like a crowd, like a tight-knit crowd. What I realized was there was one figure that was slightly off to the side, and I thought, realistically, if I could, reach one of them and start shining some light there, and they could change the direction of their emotion and their frequency, there would be the opportunity to change. I mean, I've noticed, as an example, when somebody's crossed over from a traumatic death, their state of being is fear and confusion, and it's vibrating at such a frequency that simply by holding them, hugging them, comforting them, listening, and being with them can calm their energy and changes their frequency. And in this particular case with the Greys, I didn't have the opportunity to do that because they were so wanting. It was like somebody who's can't swim and is drowning in a pool. Lifeguards know that. Addicts. Yeah, if a lifeguard's going to jump in, you have to be really careful because they're so desperate to survive that chances are they'll take you out in the process.
Well, you just did mention one of the key elements, which is an emotional vampire. and it's staggering to me that we have that our consciousness right now is dealing with vampirism on the physical plane in through all the films and movies that are making so much money at the box office. I find it fascinating that we as a culture are still trying to make sense out of sucking off each other's life forces.
Yes. I mean, the comparison to the Death Eaters, when I saw that Harry Potter movie, I went, oh, they have no idea how close they are to some things that are out there. And, I mean, I'm glad that most people do not experience that because I'll tell you, Marla, I've been dropped into some scenarios where I find myself in a house that it's so void of any higher frequency of light or compassion that it's just like I want to shed that skin. And because it's so foreign, that depth of despair and anger and that intent that goes with it, that dark energy, it just, I have to get out of there because it's so overwhelming and it is frightening that exists.
Let's take a little break, Monica, and let's come back and discuss how those of us who are interested in this work can start paying attention and maybe sign up for a job like this. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Dreamland. This is Marla Fries, and Monica, I got to tell you, this is one of the most exciting conversations that I've had from reading one of the most dynamic books I have ever come across. So I'm just mesmerized by this new element, a new piece to the work of the psychic medium, the healer, the interdimensional astral body. Wow, it's just amazing. So what would you like to say to our listeners regarding, navigating those consciousnesses that are the dark, the void? Now that you've had some experience here, your book does talk about some of the healing aspects, and I'd like for you to share with some of these things how you feel we, as physical beings, need to look at this and possibly how we, in our dreams, lucidly can maybe even assist others.
I think one of the things that I stumbled upon by accident when trying to talk to other people is I find for myself what really worked was this art of allowing. And when I first saw the show Medium on television, I loved it. I love it because for people out there who don't have experiences but they need something visual to compare it to, what the character Alison Dubois goes through at night when she lays herself down to sleep is so true. She has these experiences, and that's the way it is for me. It's like a puzzle. It's not always straightforward.
Right, absolutely. And, Alison doesn't actually work that way. So she was, this by virtue of television, they're giving you a foray of your own show.
That's interesting. I mean,
that's not how she works.
Oh, wow,
no.
Because when I saw it, I thought, oh, my gosh, that is so true. And people have often said to me, well, why don't you go to the police? And I say, because I don't have all the pieces of information. Because you cannot jump to conclusions. No. You cannot see something and take it that's the way it is.
Well,
and
you do have to let this all go. And the art of allowing, I mean, you have to practice this and really, really live this.
You know what? You have to make yourself into the observer and to take a back seat and allow it to unfold. And there have been times when I've brought a message to somebody, a loved one who's still here, and I have learned, do not change a single word that they say or do not change the image. Literally retell the best that you can what you saw, felt, or heard.
You know what? That's very important. And, a lot of people who do the work that I have done as a medium, the tendency is to put your own spin on it, and you can't. You have to be as clear and as precise in just giving the information.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to take a back seat. I had one dream experience, and this could be maybe shed some light for people. When there are cases of a tragedy where there is more than one person involved, say, for example, a family, I'd like people to know that they do find each other. And I'll give an example. I'm dropped into a harbor on a dockside in my dream, and a woman wants to communicate with me, but she is unable to communicate with words or whatever for some reason. Mm-hmm. That's why I say the newly dead, they're newbies. They don't always know how it works. Mm-hmm. And she hands me a note and shoves it in my pocket. And even though I don't read the note and I don't see the note, I know what it means and what it's asking. And she shoves me with both her hands really forcibly back into the water. Now, this is where you learn, don't take things personally. It's not about you. And I suddenly find myself underwater, and her asking me was to try and find the rest of her family members. Mm-hmm. So I find myself in an upturned boat, a capsized boat, and I know from her note that I'm supposed to find her husband and her daughter. And so I'm frantically trying very quickly because from my perspective, I thought maybe they are still alive and there's a little bit of air, left in a pocket and maybe I can get to them in time. Unfortunately, they had already passed over, but by virtue of me finding the father, he disappeared immediately, and then I found the little girl and she disappeared immediately, and all of a sudden I found myself back on the dockside with this woman who had her husband and her daughter there, and she embraced me in a wonderful hug with a thank you and just disappeared.
Wow. Well, now, have you taken this work and applied it to working perhaps with law enforcement? Because this is my joy. I love the idea of being able to do this, because have you sat and utilized your skills as a medium with the living and possibly linked into this dynamic while you're working?
Marla, I might have more of a realistic opportunity now because, with this book and that. But I mean, realistically, previous to this, if I were to phone up,
I know,
an authority and say...
Yeah, I get it. You have to be put in the right situation. But I'm sitting here thinking, okay, if you and I were working together...
Oh, now that I would love.
If you and I sat with a group of people or with an individual or with law enforcement officers working on a potential case, and I can't even imagine what, between the two of us, or, you, of course, by yourself, what you could ascertain from being able to, in your waking moments, tap into what you may have perceived the night before. I mean, this could be fascinating for you, Monica.
Well, one of my frustrating issues is that I don't always know where it took place in the world, and so I have this experience.
Oh,
no, but no, this is valid. This is great, Marla, because I mean, in the context of it, I can't dictate where, what, when. It just happens, and there's that art of allowing. However, there are occurrences, there are occasions where I have something very specific, and I have actually tried to reach out, but not having the connections, the network to talk to give the information that I have so that somebody like yourself could take it to the next level. I mean, hey, you may be getting a phone call from me now in the future, but it does open that up, and it's interesting because people tend to put labels on psychics or mediums, and I try to explain to people I don't do readings, and as far as intent goes, I have to let go of the outcome.
Yes, of course you do, and that's one of the things that's the hard thing about the physical plane, because everybody has an intent about an outcome, and the dynamic and the time frame of when murderers or whatever are brought to justice, it's not in our hands.
Yes.
And even when the opportunity to work on a case or whatever, it's not in our hands. And find us is pretty unique and interesting. As you will find, and I'm sure through this incredible opportunity that you're offering with your book, I'm sure that you're going to be orchestrated into sharing the story in the best way possible for whomever.
Yes.
And if you are meant to, bring it on that earth plane and, possibly work with me on the side or something, that will be facilitated. But I think that what you have done and the beautiful way that you not only have illustrated some of this, but written it, it's just a joy. And I'm very excited. I can say that this is one of the greatest moments of my 2009, just to be able to introduce this information and give people this opportunity and this experience.
Well, thank you, Marla. I mean, I guess in one sense, getting this book out there with the stories behind the experiences and the artwork was my one way that I could somehow try and get that message out there for all those people, for all those parents, for all those loved ones that don't know what happened after, to at least get that message out there that they are not alone in their passing, and they do make their way home, and they were not alone.
They're not alone.
And if that brings some comfort to somebody out there, then at least I can do it in this broad, general way, hopefully, because I felt so helpless. I felt so helpless. On one hand, yes, the spirit of this person I know made it, and they were completely at ease because this light is all accepting. So there is no remorse, or there is none of those feelings. But the people, the loved ones who are still here and are grieving, they don't know. And as a parent myself, I could not even imagine what that would be like.
Oh, I know. It's just the most horrific thing to think about that. And I'm sitting here, and what's popping into my mind, Monica, is the idea of this holiday season. This is a true Christmas past present. I mean, you are giving us another spin on Dickens' tale of taking Scrooge or taking the possibility of Scrooge's death and showing him, hey, look, this is what this was like, and this is what this is now, and this is what could be, and you're giving us a whole nother dimension on this. It's just been a pleasure. Thank you so much, and this book is going to go up, the website, and please, I wish to God I could get you to promise me on air that you are going to find a way to make your paintings available in print form.
I am actually, that is in progress right now. I'm waiting. There's a website called myartchannel.com, and it's offering an opportunity for artists to create prints digitally. I mean, this digital scanner is what the Smithsonian uses, and it's just going to be a couple months before we can actually generate it and distribute it. So I am really keeping my fingers crossed that within a few months, and it will be on the website.
And you put me on the top of your list. Thank you so much, Monica Holy. The book is The Fringe Dweller on the Night Shift, True Stories from an Afterlife Paramedic. It's just been a pleasure.
Thank you.